Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Research Triangle PowerShell User Group. My name is Mike Kanakis, and I am joined by my co-host, Stephen Judd. And with tonight, we are happy to welcome a longtime friend and longtime community contributor. We'd like to welcome Jeff Hicks to the show. Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Hello.
Stephen, how are you? Hey,
Hey,
guys.
I'm doing good. Excited about this evening.
Yeah, me too. So, if you're wondering where my co-host Phil is, Phil was in an incredibly bad car accident and will not be with the group for quite some time. So we have Stephen filling in his absence, and we want to wish the best to Phil. Hopefully he'll recover soon. And also Kevin, one of the other co-leads of our group, wasn't able to join us tonight. He came down with a case of malaria, and he will not be able to join us for a while either. So Stephen and I will be holding down the fort for a while, and we thank you for joining us tonight. So,
I'm,
Stephen, what's new?
I'm over here trying to cool off because I'm starting to think that the co-host karma is not pretty awesome over here. Either that or you're sending people out to get people. Are you wanting all the spotlight there, Mike?
um, I'll listen. Maybe what I said was a little bit of a fabrication. Just there, I said it.
What? There's
Maybe
no
a
fact
little bit.
checking?
Okay. Well, you sure are cracking us up. Well, I am curious to know what knowledge Jeff has brought us because I swear every time I watch Jeff talk, I'm like, this is a topic that I know well, but I'm gonna watch Jeff talk about it anyway. And doggone, every single time I'm like, that is magic. I don't know why I didn't know that before, but I'm so glad I know it now. So, I'm looking forward to this session.
Yes. So, Jeff, how are you, and what will you be sharing with us this evening?
Well, I am fine. Thanks for having me back. It's been a minute. Um, Looking forward to seeing everyone next month in Bellevue for the PowerShell Summit. So that should be a lot of fun.
Same
Um,
here. Yes.
yep. Now tonight I'm going to talk about a topic that, to me, I just assume everyone is doing it, but I don't think they are. Um, and I want to talk about why you should do something such as creating custom formatting views for your custom output from your functions and scripts, even if you need to. And I'll get into all that. So I want to talk about something that is a topic that I think more people should take advantage of, especially if you want to make PowerShell tools that are easier for someone to consume, and by consuming I mean even just reading on the screen. And that person, of course, could be you. Doesn't have to be anyone else, but what would make your life easier to consume the data that's coming out of your PowerShell functions? That's the kind of stuff I want to talk about. So you
Awesome.
want me, and I can get into it whenever you are ready. I'll
Well,
share
I
my
know
screen.
that this talk is for Matt, but it's also for everyone. So I'm looking forward to that part.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
I, you,
okay.
you you knew what you were getting. You knew what you were getting. That's
I,
what you
I
get.
I blame Phil. I blame Phil. He didn't
Yeah.
come. Car accident. This is what I get.
We should blame the other driver.
All right. In all truth be told, there is a reason that we're talking about custom formatters tonight, and that is because I'm going to do this, and I would like to do this for some of my code at work. And so that was where I got the idea. And Jeff and I talked about this, and I know that Jeff has talked about this a few times in the past, but I do think this is a topic that it just goes over people's heads. If I remember correctly, you got to create some XML files and
And
that
I
kind of
would,
stuff. And I think if you take away the tools that Jeff has created to make it easier on their own, it seems hard. And I think that's the challenge. But with
yeah.
that, I'll shut up and we'll hand it over to Jeff.
All right. So I'm going to share my VS Code screen. Let's see here. Where is, VS Code. All right. So I minimized, so I can't see the Teams meeting or the chat. I just see my screen. Hopefully you all see
We see
my
your
VS
screen.
Code and a screen that shows custom PowerShell formatting. I'm going to try something different tonight. I'm not using PowerPoint. I am using a polyglot notebook for my presentation. So I'll share everything. It'll be up on GitHub, and I'll give you the link here. I'll make the repo public when we're all done here. So there is a polyglot notebook that I'll be using, which if you want to, pull the info from the repo, you'll need to install this polyglot notebook extension and some other, there's a .NET interactive extension you also need to install. And then I have instructions here on how to open the notebook, and then you can walk through the notebook just as I'm going to do right now. So any questions on that before we get into it?
No, I think we're good.
So the notebook is really cool because I can combine markdown text and PowerShell code that I can execute directly from the notebook, and it executes in VS Code and is displayed in the notebook, which you'll all see if you've not seen notebooks before. So I want to talk about doing more with PowerShell custom formatting. So this matters because, and I've run into this with Mike years ago. Maybe he doesn't remember our discussion about, he created this function, had a really big object, and he thought, I only wanted to show these small number of things, so I'm only going to create the output that only shows these small number of things. And I went through and tried to explain to him, so I'm going to do it again tonight to help Mike out. When you are writing your PowerShell functions, and I'm just going to talk about functions in general, this could apply to scripts. I'm assuming most of you are writing PowerShell functions that are probably creating some sort of custom output. So you're writing some object to the pipeline. When you're writing a function, you need to think about the person who is consuming or using that function. What output do they want to see? What properties of information would be valuable to them? Don't limit yourself in thinking, okay, that's too many properties. Think about anything and everything that they, and again, meaning you, could possibly want. Throw it in there. Make the object as rich. You don't have to go back and add stuff. Throw it in now, because you can always control what the user sees through the custom formatting. That's the whole point. So don't limit what you're doing in an attempt to make the output look pretty. Anticipate what the user wants and include it from the very beginning. We'll make it pretty with the formatting. PowerShell does this already. Process objects are a great example. And I think I just accidentally ran the cells here. Let's try this. Let me clear this. So I'm going to get my current process ID and then look at that, right? So you've all seen this output. So that's the default output we get with a process object. But most of you probably also know that the process object is a really rich, big object, right? There are lots of properties. But we don't see all those properties, right? We just see the default table with the column headings listed there. Someone at Microsoft, when PowerShell was built in version 1, decided an IT pro, most likely, when they want to look at processes, they want to see this table view. That's the best way that they will probably want to consume that data. And so they built, using PowerShell's formatting system, a way for PowerShell to handle that object, say, oh, you haven't told me to do anything else. I have a default formatted view of that data that is a table with these column headings. And in PowerShell 7, the column headings that have been customized, meaning they're different than the object property, are italicized. That's a PS style setting actually that you can change if you want. So I always tell my students, when you're looking at the output of an object in PowerShell, don't assume that the column headings you see are the actual property names, because they can be changed. The data itself can be formatted. And we're going to get into all of this. So PowerShell does this automatically for most everything that you work with, from PowerShell services and files and ACLs, AD objects, all of that. But for your stuff that's custom, you also can create your own custom views. The important thing here is to separate the data from the formatting. So the formatting directives are stored in these PS1 XML files. Now in Windows PowerShell, these are all under the $PS home subdirectory, and you'll see them listed here. It's like file system, the event viewer, all the core commandlets, all usually some descriptor.format.ps1 XML. In PowerShell 7, all of these files have been moved internally into the compiled code for performance reasons. So in $PS home in PowerShell 7, you won't find these files. They're all in the code base itself. However, we can still create the same format.ps1 XML file that we used in Windows PowerShell. We can create a similar file for our objects in PowerShell 7 and load them into our PowerShell session. So this does look a little gnarly, especially for those of you who blanch at the idea of working with XML. I'm not going to go through all of this here, but you can see there's an object type, and I can say, yep, I want this to be a table, or I want to define a list. So we create the XML. I'll get to all of this here in a little more detail in a moment. Your XML file can mix and match. You can have lists and tables all in the same file, so you really only have to worry about creating one file. And I'll give you my trick for simplifying that process a little bit later. One big requirement: the custom objects that you define must have a unique type name. You cannot use just a generic PS custom object and create custom formatting. So in the formatting file, you'll see this XML here, view selected by, type name, and then the object type goes in that space there. So what I do, and I'm assuming most of you do as well, if you're creating a custom object, say with the PS custom object type accelerator, add a key called PS type name. I typically put mine at the beginning, so it's really clear to me that this is the object type, and then the name that you want to give to that object. This key, when it shows up here as a PS custom object, gets applied and becomes the type name of that object. It doesn't show up as a separate key or property like name, computer name, status, and so on. If you're defining a class, of course, the class name, like PSFoo here, that becomes the type name. Or if you are working with an existing object, say something that you created with select object with some custom properties, if you save that to an object like $out, you can then insert, using this syntax here, you can insert a new type name. In this case, I'm inserting my PSFoo type name into the object. So as long as your object output has a unique type name, you can create a custom object. So let's look at an example here. So I have a function that's going to get some server information. And let me I'm not going to spend a lot of time here about this. Let me load this function into my notebook. All right, so here's the help. It just basically takes a computer name and a credential, or do a sim session. The hash table inside the function there creates a ordered hash table, and I put the key in server status. Later on in the code here, down here on line 94, I'm using new object to turn that hash table into a custom object. So that's where that type name then gets applied and becomes the object type, in this case, server status. So I'm going to run my function without any formatting, all right? So there's the default display. Really, it's pretty simple. It's just a simple object with only a couple properties. Now, PowerShell automatically already converts it to a table because there are 5 or fewer properties, but that's also my raw data. And I'm betting that at least 80% of you, if not more, you stop right there and you think, oh, yep, that's good enough. I got what I needed and I'm done. And this is why I take a moment and think, what would make that better? What would make that easier to read? Where could you add value to the output? This is where custom formatting comes in. So if I run my variable, so you can see I have the properties listed there, and you can see there's my type name that got applied. So I'm sure there's nothing magical happening here. All right, so now the magic part. Manually creating that XML is a pain. Now, if you love that kind of pain, go right ahead, create the XML format from scratch. I use a command called new PS format XML that is in the PS script tools module that you can install from the PowerShell gallery. With this, you can create list or table views from a reference object. All you need is a sample object, and as long as that sample object has values for all of the properties that you want to define, it'll work. So I can take my sample object $R, pipe it to the new PS format XML, the path to my XML file. It defaults to table, but I'm going to list it here as a table, and I'm specifying all of the properties. There's a parameters. You'll see some other examples here in a bit where you can specify different parameters. And so when I run that, I then will, I need to open this up here. When I run that, I will get a file that looks like this. So the file, the function, new PS format XML, and when you get the notebook, it's got links here that will open up to GitHub for the command and the module there. That's why those are highlighted. But the function will create this XML file. It automatically auto sizes, and it will go through and create. Well, actually, let me take a moment here and explain how this all works, because you will want to customize the formatting here. So we have a view, we have the type name, we have then a list of table headers. This obviously the headers. The label is the text that you see. The width is actually irrelevant as long as you're using auto size. If I delete this node, then the width comes back into play. The alignment is where you want the text of your value, and typically it's left, right, or center. So what I have done already in this sample I pasted into the notebook here, I have gone in and changed the header for the percent free memory and changed it and put in the percent symbol free mem. And I also made it align to the right because the default was to the left. And I changed the alignment for percent free C. I don't know why I didn't change the name, but I didn't. That's fine. Now here's the fun part. So you got your headers, and then you have all your rows, and your rows have the corresponding column items. Most of the time, the column items are just going to be the property name, like percent free mem C or percent free C. The headers and the column rows have to be in the same order. However, you can also create custom output using a script block. So here's the first column item, and this is the uptime. And I am using a script block, and in that script block, I am just formatting the uptime property and stripping off the milliseconds, because I really don't need to see, if I scroll up to show you the output again here, that's really, to me, that's kind of ugly. And, I really don't need to know that this server has been up to that degree of certitude. I just need, days, hours, minutes, seconds, and I'm good. So I'm going to clean up that output and get rid of the milliseconds. It's a small thing, but it makes, to me anyway, it makes a big difference. So that's all I'm doing here in this script block. One thing, be careful of when you put in your script block nodes, because I still get hit by this. This is XML, so it's case sensitive. So make sure that it's script block both for the opening and closing, and that your casing is consistent.
Hey,
And it
Jeff,
has to be script block the way that I have written here.
quick question there.
Yeah.
On the script block, is it basically anything that you can do in PowerShell?
Yep. So when you create a custom property with select object, the code that you put in that expression section, that's what you can put in here.
Awesome.
I mean, you don't want to go crazy because this has to happen really quickly. So you don't want to be dot sourcing stuff and loading files and importing modules and anything like that. Think more, what would you do with select object to customize the output, and put that code in the script block here. That make sense?
It does. And for the record, I never go crazy. Okay, maybe
I
that's
know
not
you're
true.
already there. I know you're already there.
It's a very short trip.
Yeah, yeah. So you then customize and save your XML file, and typically the formatting, the file name is typically the name of your type .format.ps1xml. It should be a PS1 XML. The type name .format isn't required, but it helps you identify what the file is if you follow that format. So now I can run update format data, specify the path to the XML file. So that loaded, you can validate it, and you can use get format data actually with any object type if you want to see what kind of formatting is installed or loaded into your PowerShell session. So if I do get format data, my custom property or custom type name, server status, you can see that I have a default formatted view. The whole object is kind of gnarly, so I'm going to kind of step through it here a bit and show you there's a format view definition property. You can see that it's a table control. I can go through the control property. There are my headers and the rows. I can look at the headers. So this is the data that is in my XML file. The width is actually irrelevant here again because I have auto size set to true. And then here are my columns that you can see. There is no set format data commandlet. The only way you can modify the formatting is to update the XML file and then reload it into your PowerShell session. It should work. If you are finding that it doesn't get updated, especially if you do this a lot, sometimes the best thing to do is just start your PowerShell session again and start all over again. So the formatting data that I just did for my function only exists for long as PowerShell is running. If this is a function that I'm using in my profile all the time, I typically would put the update format data command in the script file itself, and just use update type data $ps script root / the name of the file and get it all to go in. But now that it is installed in my session, I'm going to rerun my get server status command. And now you can see the milliseconds have been stripped off. There's my custom header. You can see it because it's italicized. And it's a little bit nicer, a little bit easier to read. It doesn't take up quite as much space. To me, again, all those milliseconds just kind of are wasted space and just visually, intrusive. I don't need to see that, so get rid of it. And you can also see that the values now are aligned, and just visually that's a little bit easier to read. There's more, as they say, late night. Why stop there? You can use custom formatting to add value and information. I love being able to present something and have it give me information on multiple layers, multiple levels. So I'm going to modify my script file or my formatting file, and I'm going to customize the output here of these values, these memory percentage, these percentage free values, because I want to display them in color. So I'm going to have an if statement here looking at the percent free mem property. If the value is less or equal to 30, I'm going to set the style to this ANSI sequence. And you could also use PS style if you want, but this is going to put it in blink and a reddish color. Warning will make it kind of an orangey color, I think, and then otherwise it'll be, I think, in green. So I'm defining with an if else statement, actually if else if else statement, defining what that style is, and then just building a string here with that style, my value from the object, and then doing the PS style reset. I have found that switch doesn't seem to work properly in script blocks, so you end up having to do an if else if statement. So I define those script blocks in percent free mem to display the values in different colors. So I'm going to reload the file. Actually, I have a new file here. This is format 2.ps1xml. It's the same object type, but it has these new property names here. So now, if I rerun this, and this is where, unfortunately, VS Code doesn't render this very well. So I have some screenshots here that I did from my earlier. So here you can see the orange for the percent free memory, and my percent free C in my local host is in red. And if I were to do this in the PowerShell console, it would actually blink at me. That's kind of cool. And then here I ran a bunch of sim sessions in my test domain, and you can see the percent free memory is also kind of at that warning level, but it's okay. Percent free C must be in my regular, I'll have to double check the colors, but you can see I now have added some additional information. The blinking is kind of cool. So I hope you'll give that a shot on your own system so you can see that in action. Let's look at another example here. And this is kind of, harkens back to what I was trying to help Mike with years ago. So I have this really rich object. So I've got a type name, and it displays a bunch of information to the pipeline in this custom object. So let's take a look at this. And the function is in the downloads or in the repository, so I'm not going to show you the code. We're just going to look at the output. So here is the output, and you can see by default, it's a big object, right? There's a lot of information happening there. That's a lot to take in all at once. And I don't know why I keep getting this SMB error. It actually works. If I rerun it in the notebook, then I don't get that error. It must be something in the way that, yeah, whatever. All right, so there's my output. But I want to see this in a table view, even though I have all these properties. I want to limit what is exposed to me by default. This is where using either select object or format table is a great way to prototype. So I'm going to take my sample object, $n, pipe to format table and kind of rough this out, say, this is what I want to see whenever I run my command. I want output that kind of looks like that, where it's grouped. I see the last boot, the uptime, and you can see I'm using some script blocks here in my custom formatting to take the memory, calling processes instead of running processes, services instead of running services. What's nice here, if you prototype like this, new PS format XML will allow you to use those expression script blocks, and it will import them into the XML file. So I can basically rerun my command and just do new PS format XML, group by computer name, properties, and then just put in these script blocks that I have already used up there. In the resulting XML file, so this is PS server detail.format PS1 XML, I will also go ahead and customize the grouping. So instead of I could have done it here, but it was too messy. I thought I'll just do it in the XML file because I want it to show the computer name and then the operating system as part of the header, if you will, for the grouping. And I'm also going to use color for this. So in the group by tag, you can also put in a script block. So the label is the text. By default, it shows the property name. I'm changing that to say server. And then the value will be the value whatever comes back from the script block here. So if the computer name matches DOM, meaning a domain controller, I want to display it in one particular color. Otherwise, I'll display it in a different color. And then the output will be my ANSI foreground, the computer name, reset, and then I've got a set of square brackets, and inside the square brackets, I'm having italicized the name of the operating system. And because I use eval copy just to make things cleaner, I'm just dropping off the evaluation from the OS name and then the reset. And I made a few other minor adjustments. So let's load that formatting file and look at $n again. There's my new output. So you can see, and again, the color looks better in the console than it does in VS Code or in the notebook. But you can see I have customized my headers. I have aligned things. I have the server names in bold. The OS is italicized. Here is an example from my test domain that gives you a little bit better understanding of the color. So the domain controllers are kind of in green, server names are in purple. I think that's a little bit easier to read and certainly more informative than the default table view that I got from my function.
Hey, Jeff, before you move on, that's
Yep.
amazing. Can you go back up to the script block right quick?
Yep.
So something I've done when I'm formatting color using these escape sequence is, and maybe you can tell me whether you thought of this, is to define the reset as a variable so that you could do $reset instead of doing the code in there in the output. Might make it a little easier to read for someone who's just kind of scanning through this.
Yeah, well, you could always use $PS style.reset so that it is kind of already defined. Yeah, otherwise you have to define that in the script block,
Right.
which doesn't, if you define it in this, you could just add a comment. Yeah, that's kind of up to you. And you can see and I would encourage you, if you customize, put in comments in your XML file so that when you go back and look at this in 6 months, go, oh, that's why I put that in. And that's what that's doing.
Yeah, I love this. This is super cool.
All right. There's even more. So we can also have, with formatting, So I've got a table view right now, but I also want to have a list view, a default list view, and I'm going to add it to the same formatting file. So if I pipe my variable to format list, I want to see a certain subset of all those properties. So I'm going to take my object, new format, new piece format XML, append, path. I want this time to be a list, and these are the properties that I want. Again, you can customize these with hash tables and script blocks if you want, but I don't really need that necessarily for my list view. So this code was already run, is already in the XML file that is currently loaded. So I can just take my $n, pipe it to format list, and there is my list view. If I want to see everything, I can do format list star, and I'll see all the properties listed as a star. So this is a nice way of giving me a list if I just want to see a subset of properties. We can also create additional views of the same type, meaning list or table. For example, maybe I have code, and I'm going to have to, fix this. Oh, here, I can fix this right now. That's the nice thing about the notebook. I have an extra comma there. Where I want to take my variable, my object, and select computer name, and I want a property called memgb, free memgb. You can see the values there from the script blocks. But I don't want to have to type that all the time. So instead, I create a custom view. So I'm going to take, again, my object, append path. Now I need to create a new view for my table type, and I'm going to call it memory. The default is default or the object type, but if I give it a view name, then I'll be able to specify that view when I call format table, which you'll see here in a moment. And then the properties that I want to include. So I have here, so here is the actual XML file. So view configurations, there's my default view. Here's the list view. Let me minimize that. And then here's my memory view. And you can see that it is a table. And here are the script blocks that were imported from the command. So now when I want to look at those properties, format as a table, I can just do format table dash view memory. You could also, and this is beyond what I wanted to get into tonight, you could also create custom type extensions or property sets to display that same information. So you could do $n select object dash property memory. I'm just using this as a formatted view, but this is something that we actually have in PowerShell. They're not easy to discover, so you kind of need to document this if you're putting this into a module or your function. But that gives me another way to take my rich object and consume that information in a meaningful fashion that suits whatever need I might have. All right, last thing to talk about here then are how this might apply to your modules. So for custom formatting that I do with standalone functions, I typically will insert this line of code at the end of the script file that has the function. So when I dot source the script file, it loads the function and then runs update format data and loads the formatting. So everything is all done. For modules, you're still going to create same format PS1 XML file. That doesn't change. Customize it all you want. In a module, There's no rules for this, but I typically store all my format files in a subfolder. So I have this PS Blue Sky module, and which uses custom formatting extensively. So in my formats directory, I have all of my format.ps1 XML files. In the module manifest, there's a formats to process key, and I just specify my array of all of those files. So when I import the module, all of these files are automatically loaded into my PowerShell session. I have done in this particular module, this Blue Sky module, I've done a lot of customization. I've also done a lot with custom controls, things that you would do with format custom. This is a whole nother topic that I wasn't really going to dive into, although I have an example here of what it looks like. So you create a custom control, you create a custom item, there's an expression binding, you put in script blocks, new lines. It's not very well documented, but you can look at the examples that I have here and kind of reverse engineer it. So here's how and why I did this. So again, taking my Blue Sky module, the profile object, where you run get bsky profile, brings your profile object back. It's a really rich object. See, lots of properties. But I want to make it easier to consume. So my custom formatting for that looks like this. And the formatting also includes hyperlinks that I create with PS style. So this is actually a hyperlink to my Blue Sky profile. So if you were to run this, and I've got a number of Blue Sky commands where there'll be links to posts or profiles. And if you're running Windows Terminal, which automatically turns these into hyperlinks, you can just click the link in your terminal and open up the link in your browser, which is really cool. So some other module examples of mine. I have a module called PS Project Status, which I use. This uses a JSON file that I use to keep track about what I'm working on in a module, what the status is, what things I'm working on, what branch age, all that. Anyway, so this is a big object that gets built from the JSON file, and I have a custom formatting file that says, hey, if I get a status object, this is how to format it. So it shows, you can see it's in color. I get the path to it. The status is colorized. The aging has been customized. AD reporting tools, another module. Here, again, I've used a lot of custom controls and custom formatting. So if I run this command in the module, this has all been custom formatted. It's not just the object with all the properties listed out in a list. I have made this so that it is easy to read and consume. And then lastly, I have a PS work item, which uses a SQLite database to keep track of all my to-dos. And one of the features is able to tag your to-do with a category. And so the categories use ANSI escape sequences. So this command will write an object to the pipeline, but it will then format it using the ANSI escape sequences so you can actually see the color that's being used for the sequence. And all of this I'm talking about, just a quick little plug here, knowing when and why to use custom formatting isn't always obvious, certainly not clearly documented. So that's why I wrote this latest book, Behind the PowerShell Pipeline. I'm going to be talking at Summit. I'm doing a talk on the human side of scripting, where I'll dive a little bit more into this, talking about all the squishy bits about PowerShell. It's easy enough to use, ChatGPT or VS Code or Copilot and say, give me syntax to do X. But you need to think about who's using X. What are their expectations? What other things do I need to keep in mind that it's going to make that code usable and friendly and play nicely with others in the PowerShell pipeline. Right now, I don't think AI, unless you are a really extremely talented AI engineer or prompt engineer, you're not going to be able to have AI give you that code. So you can say, I want learn the squishy bits. Go, yeah, I want a function that does this. Okay, I need a code that's going to do X, Y, and Z. Sure, ask AI to give you the syntax, but all the other stuff that goes around it when we build a function, that's the stuff that is kind of not so obvious. And that's why I wrote this book, which grows out of a newsletter that I've been running for the last couple of years. The book is a collection of articles that have been cleaned up and expanded and fleshed out. It's about 500 pages about all the stuff that you didn't know that you needed to know in order to write, good PowerShell code. So I will make all of my links and code clean here when we're done. I've enabled questions in the GitHub repo. Right now, it is still private. I can make it public here in a moment, but questions, was that useful?
Yeah. So I it's great to watch the layout and the genesis from the beginning to the end. I think the challenging part is when you're at step one or step two is like understanding what else is possible. When you have the whole project like you've laid out now, it all makes sense. But it's sort of like I'll use the example of the stock market. It's easy to look back and say, I knew I should have sold my stock then because it was going to go down, or I knew I should have held because look, it went up. But at the time, you don't know what the future holds. And so when you write some code, you make a function, and you start to think, what's the next thing I should do? I, you were saying, Jeff, earlier that you would hope that a lot of people are doing this, but I think most people aren't because I think uh, people just don't know how to think like in a way that's outside of their own use case. If that makes sense. Like I know what I want and I write the code to solve my problem, but not necessarily how do I write the tool to solve everybody's problems. You have to kind of look at your code independently and say what else can it do besides what I use it for. And so I don't think it's so obvious for people how to figure out when to start implementing custom formats and things like that. Do you have any tips or ideas how you start to develop like, a better view would be better, would be helpful here? Do you just
Well,
use it for a while and then realize there's efficiencies that could be gained or?
sort of. One thing, and I realize now I skipped it over in my presentation. One thing you do not want to do is do not put format table or format list or any formatting command list inside your function.
Mhm.
Your function should just write the object to the pipeline. Do not include formatting because you have no idea how the person using that code wants to format and display it. Okay. So that's the important thing. Keep the idea of what the output looks like separate from what the output is. And so first thing I would say is focus on what the output is. Think about all the information that you could get. So let's say, for example, that you are pulling down some data from a server using a REST API, and you're writing an object to the pipeline. Is there more data that's coming from that REST API that you could be consuming? Sure, maybe 95% of the time, someone will never want, most of that data. But what if they do? You've missed an opportunity. Put the data in the object. Don't worry about it getting in the way, because that's where then formatting comes in. So build the object with all the properties that you think you're going to need, even that you can't possibly think. Don't think about what is someone going to want all the time. Think about what is someone going to want maybe some of the time, and include that still, because you can always hide that with custom formatting.
Hmm.
And I think this is the discussion we had years ago with something you were working on.
I had made a function to return information for a user for our help desk. So what I basically was pulling back was the employee data and then the information about their AD object. So essentially, my problem was is I was trying to create a function for the help desk that when someone called in, all the things that I do, I usually recognize patterns and try to minimize those patterns. And so I would watch my help desk every day, take calls, and go through the AD uses of computers and go through like 9 different tabs to validate information. So I thought, let's return all that. And then I had grouped sort of what I thought was like the employee information. So if you wanted to validate who a user was, this is their name, title, department manager, and maybe whatever things we would use to validate them. And then at the bottom, I had the information in AD that would be useful to them. Password last reset, were they locked out? Is their password expired? Things like that. And so I had split them into 2 objects and was displaying both of those objects separately. And so, in hindsight, I see the downside to that. But at the time, that seemed like the logical way to go, you know. And so that's the challenge for me is like figuring out, well, I have this, what can I do next with it? That's the challenge for me. And I think probably for a lot of people. Stephen, is that your experience? Like,
Yeah, for me, it's whenever I take an object, I like get a whole lot of data, like what Jeff was talking about, and I try to get like every property that I can think of that might be useful, and having this skill of being able to do a custom formatter, because like if you do get process and you do pipe that to select star, you're going to see a ton of stuff.
yeah.
Also, if you've ever worked with any of the WMI objects, the WMI objects return a ton of properties. And so being able to filter those down. Now, the pile on for that is the how do you filter down is kind of what Mike's getting at is how do you know which columns to focus on in order to give those to your users, but don't take away any of those. So, like Jeff was saying, you don't want to go into the bottom of your script where you're outputting the results of your object and pipe that into format table and give them the 3 things that you think are amazing. It does 2 things. One, it messes up your object property because format table does that. And so then you wind up with multiple objects that it returns from. And then the user's like, well, I can't do anything with this now that I have this object. You really want to return something that's pipelinable. And so being able to do custom formats, most of the time, at least for me, it's how often do I spend time on this object? And then that determines whether or not I need a custom format. Because if it's well, I keep doing the thing that Jeff showed actually in his code, in his Polyglot notebook, where he's like, well, if you take this select formatter, then you can just put that into your XML. I told you at the beginning that I was going to learn something that I didn't know before, and I was like, that right that just made my evening, and now I have something to go play with, and I'm very excited about it. Minor comment while I was thinking of it right now, the italicized. You made a comment of that where the column headers are italicized if you used a formatted, excuse me, a custom name for the header.
Yep.
That's only visible on PowerShell 5, and it's subtle. But once you
PowerShell
start
7.
to, excuse me, it's only available on PowerShell 7. It's not available on PowerShell 5.
Right.
But once you start looking for that, you're like, oh yeah, that's something that I need. And I'm glad you pointed that out. I just wanted to bring that back up for people that may have glossed over that.
One other thing I want to mention, since we're talking about building the data, do not format any values, numeric values in your object output. If it's in bytes, displayed in bytes, because you can then always format it into kilobytes or megabytes, because you have no way, again, you have no way of knowing how is this person want to consume that value. Maybe Stephen wants to see the value in megabytes, but Mike wants to see it in gigabytes.
Mhm.
If you format your output in kilobytes in your function, you're not helping anyone. So you want your output object to be as rich as possible and really, I guess, as native as possible. Don't try to massage or format the data that is in the object that you are presenting to PowerShell. Let the user then decide what they want to do with that object, and you can use custom formatting, or, and this could be a whole nother topic I could come back for, type extensions and property sets to also then further customize and make that object easier to work with and easier to consume. So yeah, some of it comes from experience and just kind of wild ass thinking, oh, if I look at this number like a percent free, nice to have a little, kind of a stoplight approach. Say, hey, if this number's too low, I want a little visual reinforcement to catch my eye that,
Yeah.
oh, I need to pay attention to that.
That was super cool. I love that you put that in there because it got me thinking about something that actually, shout out to James Brundage, he brought to my attention, is that there's a whole science behind table formatting, type formatting, and then color coding to draw people's eyes to things that they need to pay attention to. So by having that simple color formatting, I mean, it sounds simple, but really the concept behind it is really intuitive, where it's like if it's at this level or worse, you need to pay attention to it. So color coding it with red. Sorry for the people that are
making a blink.
yeah, sorry for the poor people that are colorblind, but the blinking really helps with that, right?
Yeah.
If we can get some ANSI escape shapes in there to say, whatever. But that was super cool. It was very insightful.
And some of it, Mike, just depends upon, if you're writing a tool for someone like for the help desk to kind of get an understanding from talking with them about how they might incorporate it into their PowerShell practice, into their workflow, if you will.
So you sort of just beat me to the comment that I was going to make, which is I think this is sort of what separates the difference between, we'll say, a developer or a coder, a good coder and a great coder. You can write the code and you can build a solution, but if you understand the context and how it's being used, you can build better code because you understand the nature and way it's going to be used, right?
I think too many people ignore the context.
Yeah.
And they just bang out the code and say, oh, I'm done.
Right. If you use the tool yourself, I mean, so for me, I manage a team now, and so I am constantly preaching to my team, you have to be lazier, and they don't understand that at first. And I'm like, what I mean by be lazier is that you have to not want to do this repetitive task over and over again. You should be looking for patterns and practices to eliminate those things. And so when you use stuff, take away the practical uses. If you kind yourself, like Jeff was saying, you keep seeing yourself wanting to format things the same way every time, well, maybe that should be a default that it kind of comes out in that view or something like that. And that's the part that we're getting on a separate topic here, but man, that is hard to teach people. There is a certain amount of people that are happy to go through the same routine because there's a familiarity to it. To me, I want to make that go away. I don't want to have to do that over and over and over again. I want to use my brain to solve like complex problems, not the same over and over stuff. But so that's what I try to tell my team: be lazier. Try to find a way to make these things go away. And that's sort of like the contextual thing we're talking about, the programming. Like use the code, understand the nature of what it's being used for, and I think you'll understand it better.
Yep.
I'm certain now that I want to work for Mike because if you're telling me to be lazier, I am your man. Let's go.
That is what I say. Be lazier.
I can always be lazier.
Well, I worked a long time ago at another company, and this was like when I was getting my start with the PowerShell and automation and stuff like that. And I would watch guys every day go through, a little bit more in the old days when you were using GUIs and wizards. All right, next, 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 next. Okay. And they would do that 30 times in a row every day. And I'm like, don't you get tired of doing that? And the answer was honestly no, and which says a lot about them. But like, I want that to go away. There's no value in that, right? I'm not saying I don't want to work. I don't want to do useless tasks, right? So I always find myself trying to make some repetitive thing go away through some automation or some optimization. That's the part I'm trying to get my team to think about. My team is supposed to be an automation team. So if they're doing the same functions over and over and over again, recognize the pattern and find a way to optimize that. That's the idea. Comes across as be lazy though.
I like the management summary of it. Let's be lazy. But the nugget in there, the gold truth is that what we're trying to do is establish not just establish, but to recognize repeatable patterns. Like this is a pattern that repeats. And if it's a repeatable pattern and if it's on a computer, then it's something you can automate. And if
Yeah.
you can go from step 1 to step 10 in one thing, then you've just saved 9 steps. That's much faster. It's good for your enterprise. You can count on it. It's repeatable. You can measure it. These are all the things that an organization is looking for from their staff in order to say, okay, who's making a difference in our organization? Who's bringing us forward into the future? And that's why we do this, and that's what I think Jeff is talking to and what Mike's talking to is these are the skills that you want to develop and get a mindset of this is what we're looking for, here's how we resolve it. And if I add these tool sets like a good formatter skill, then you can make information more digestible and more quickly digestible. And that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, yeah. And so bringing this back to what Jeff was saying, if you're running the code and you return 10 fields and every time someone wants to filter it down to these 4, maybe that's a tell, I guess, where it's time to step in and maybe make some custom formatter or some preference there. That was really great stuff, Jeff. So just to sum up again, how do people find the stuff we talked about tonight and find out more about what you have available to them?
I published the link. It's in the chat on GitHub for all my material is already posted up there on live, so you can put that in the YouTube notes.
Okay. And so that is JD Hit Solutions is his name is the repo, and he has websites by the same name, and so you should be able to find that pretty easily.
Yeah, and I'm on Blue Sky and Mastodon. Mostly on Blue Sky. That's my preferred haunt these days.
Yeah.
Apologies. I'm sitting over here laughing at Mike saying it's JD Hit Solutions.
Yeah, I know. I was going to let it go.
Like it's
What did I do?
JDH IT Solutions.
I never ever realized that. Hey, look, I'm certainly not the smartest.
No, but you are awesome, and we do love you as a host. So thanks, Mike.
JDH IT Solutions. All right.
How long have you known Jeff? And you're just now grokking that it's JDH IT Solutions.
Yeah, it's JD Hit Solutions to me. I'm a little bit stupid.
Well, you know what? His solutions are a big hit, so you can't get away from that.
All right. So Jeff, thanks very much for sharing tonight. It was awesome as always to have you back. And I think maybe some of those topic expansions that you mentioned might be nice for us over the summer after Summit noise quiets down a little bit. So I just want to say thank you one more time to Jeff, and thank everybody for joining us tonight. We hope you come and join us at the next one. If you like what you saw tonight and you're watching this on YouTube, we have over 150 other videos. Jeff is probably in about 10 to 15 of them, so there's plenty of content for you to learn about for PowerShell in our group and others. We hope you'll join us for the next one, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone, for joining us tonight.
Bye.